We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet to share these conversations on the Vegan Compass podcast.
We extend our respect to elders past and present, as well as any of our listeners and guests. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change. We are your hosts, Rick Allport and Mackenzie Cross.
From wherever you're listening, please be sure to like and subscribe to support this podcast. Now to the episode.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vegan Compass podcast. We're so excited to have you with us today. I'm Mackenzie Cross and next to me is Rick Allport.
And how are you this evening, Mackenzie?
I'm good, thank you. It's been a big week and it's only Wednesday, but good.
Is it Wednesday?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And
that's
how
why
are
we're
you?
here. I'm confused. It has been also a very big week.
Yeah.
And yes, there's still a lot to go.
Yes. So
But-
tell us, who are we speaking to today?
I tell you what, I am very excited about this one. We've been waiting on this young lady for a while now, and we're so happy that she's technically in the room.
Yes, we'll take it.
Yeah, I'm saying she's in the room. So, folks, today we have the absolutely wonderful Georgie Purcell, of course, from Animal Justice Party and a member in the Victorian Parliament, and who is there kicking butt. So, welcome, Georgie, and I'm going to start with two questions. So, who are you and what do you do?
Thank you so much for having me on. First of all, I'm Georgie Purcell. I'm a state MP for the Animal Justice Party, and I do a whole lot of things in that job, but essentially it's my role to progress legislation that protects animals, people, and the planet, which I've been doing since November 2022, and it's absolutely flown.
It's amazing. Time has gone really quickly.
Yep, I remember the day you got elected.
Yes, we were all jumping for joy and just thought this is a wonderful thing. It's the same when Emma got elected.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, this is incredible. So
I was literally just on the phone to Emma before I came on here, and she said, I feel like I haven't spoken to you in so long. And we were reflecting on how you just don't have a moment to breathe when you're doing this job. And I think it's relatable to anyone who's trying to help animals, right? It's just one thing after the other. Something I always say in my job is, unfortunately, there's no shortage of animal suffering happening, in my state and in our country. And it just can be hard to sort of take a moment and, take a breath.
I loved it when you both appeared on the same stage at the Animal Rights Forum and you were kind of like the rock stars of the forum. And the place was just packed.
Yeah.
And everybody was transfixed on everything that you both said because, you've been doing amazing work.
Yeah, I feel really lucky to have a colleague in Emma, and now, of course, Amanda Dawn in Western Australia, who just got elected. I'm really excited to see what she does as well.
Well, we're hoping to have Amanda on as well. We've reached out to her. So if you talk to her, give her a bit of a nudge. Say, hey, come on.
Yeah. So speaking of getting elected, I guess, can you take us right back to the start and what was your motivation for first getting involved with the Animal Justice Party?
I got asked to join the Animal Justice Party outside of Flemington Racecourse probably over 10 years ago now. And someone came up to me and said, there's a new political party for animals and we're trying to get to 50 members. And I really love reflecting back on that and thinking about it, that our goal was once 50 members and now, we've got thousands across the entire country and a number of elected representatives. And at the time, it just made sense to me, but I didn't really ever think we'd have MPs, let alone myself as one of the MPs. But I joined and I started volunteering. I did a number of state elections and federal elections where at that time we were nowhere near getting elected. We were really just trying to establish our brand as a party and to show that people would vote to protect animals and, to influence the major parties to implement animal-friendly legislation to show, that this matters to people. And then I ended up working for Andy Medic, who was the first MP that got elected in Victoria. That was sort of just all happened by coincidence. I was, I'd graduated uni. I did a double degree in comms and law. I was, out working full time. And one day I got a phone call off Bruce Poon, and he was like, how do you feel about changing jobs? So I went off and I did that role. But for me, becoming a politician, like, not my plan. I never planned on doing it. My parents always say it's the least surprising thing ever, because I've always been interested in politics. Even when I was a young kid, I wrote and sung a song. I can't really say I wrote it because the song already exists, but I changed the words to Jingle Bell Rock to Polling Booth Rock, and I sung it to my parents when I was like in primary school during a federal election.
Do you have a recording of that?
I'll have to try and find it. Multiple people have asked me. My parents love telling people about it. It's very embarrassing, but they're always like, Georgie, it might have been surprising to you that you became a politician, but it absolutely was not surprising to us.
So what inspired you to actually run as a candidate? Because that's a big leap from being a team member to actually then going, hey, I'm putting my name out there and I'm going to run for it.
Yeah, look, it was a range of things. I had been working in the background in the animal protection space for a really long time before I got elected. And I was very happy being in the engine room and sort of people not knowing who I am or having a profile. I was president of Oscar's Law, and we were campaigning to ban puppy factories in Victoria. And our goal was to get just one state to commit to that, because as we know with outcomes for animals and wins for animals, often we just need one place to do it and then there'll be like a domino effect. So we were focusing on Victoria, and we actually got the Labor government to commit to doing that as an election commitment before the Animal Justice Party was in Parliament. And I remember sitting in the Legislative Council at like 11:30 p.m. at night, which is a house that I now sit in, watching that legislation be debated and passed. And I really just had this moment where I realised so often we are trying to change the law for animals and convince other politicians. Why don't we just become politicians ourselves and, take that message straight into Parliament, take the story of the animals straight into Parliament ourselves, rather than trying to convince everyone else that this was the right thing to do. But I still sort of didn't have plans of running as a candidate at that point, and I went off and, worked for an MP. But that was also coupled with me sort of knowing it was one of the most powerful tools for animals. And even if I didn't necessarily want to do the job myself, I felt a bit of an obligation to do it because it was a space that I felt like I really had a skill in. The other thing was I was working in Parliament and I was constantly saying, there's no one in here that's like me. I started doing that job when I was 26. There was a real lack of representation, particularly of women, which has really changed now, but especially so young people. And I think it was actually Bruce. He was like, you can't continue to complain about this if you're not going to do something about it. So I agreed to run as an upper house candidate, and still, even then, I thought it was a pretty slim chance that I would win. Of course, it is the House of Parliament where we can win. And then, it all just happened so quickly. It was about a 6-month period where I agreed to be a candidate, and then I got elected, and, it's now been 2.5 years and I still can't believe it.
Yeah. So how long is the term in Victoria?
It's 4 years, which goes so quick. Emma Hurst gets 8 years in New South Wales, which is really great. And I think, so important for her, because you really get to like solidify the campaign work that you're doing, your relationships with, other MPs and other ministers. A 4-year term, by the time you settle into it and then, find your groove, you're back in election cycle. We're already thinking about next year, this time next year, we'll be thinking about the November 2026 election. So I just really hope that we can keep that place in Parliament for the animals. If it's not me, I just want the Animal Justice Party to ensure that, we always have someone in there fighting for animals, and ideally more than one person.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said you weren't expecting to be elected. How did you feel when you found out that you had been elected?
Yeah, I was in shock. So it's quite a big moment when it happens, because there's all this sort of noise on election night that you watch on the TV where the lower house seats are being called and we're finding out who forms government based on the seats won in the lower house. But what a lot of people don't realise is the upper house count where I am. It takes about 3.5 weeks. For Amanda Dawn, it took 5 weeks. So we don't have that moment on election night where it's like, wow, we won. We thought it was likely that I would win, but we had to wait over 3 weeks for the count, and they kept changing the date. And then there's this event called the button push where you all go to the same, all the candidates and their friends and families go to the same room, and they literally push a button on each region, and if you got elected, your name pops up. And I just remember seeing my name pop up, and I was like, holy shit, like this is life-changing. And then just thrust into it. There was journalists, cameras, TVs, and it's just been nonstop ever since. But I feel being a politician for animals is a hard job because you've got a lot of competing priorities. I always say, you know, there is a advocacy organisation or a campaign that exists for every single species in our state, and they all want me to help them, and I'm more than happy to do that. But it's, you know, a lot of competing priorities and very demanding, and you've really got to pick and choose what is, I guess, most strategic to focus on. And of course, you deal with a lot of animal suffering and trauma every single day. Like my office is contacted with it every single day, but it's such a privilege. Like it's such an honour, and it's such a privilege to be able to go into Parliament and speak on behalf of animals. I always say, you know, if they could speak to us, they'd be a far better advocate than I. But being able to do that on their behalf is, you know, such a privilege, and I'll never take it for granted.
And I think what people need to remember is you're one person. You're one person in a parliament which isn't always very friendly. One person trying to make a difference to any animal that you possibly can. So if people are contacting Georgie, please remember that she is one person. She can only do so much, but she does pretty much everything. Now, speaking of being one person, do you have allies and people that you can rely on in Parliament? Because it is such a, I don't know the best way to do it, but it is a bit of a cutthroat environment.
You would be amazed how many times I say something in Parliament or do a question in question time, and I get a ping on my phone off a member of Parliament that's like, thank you for saying that, or I agree with you, or someone comes up to me in the hallway and is like, I can't say it publicly, but like, thank you for the work that you're doing in that space. And politics is all about relationships and, you know, building the relationships with these people and making that case to get things done. And a lot of people would be shocked if they knew just how many politicians care about animals. The thing that I guess impacts them that I don't have to deal with and I feel really grateful for is that I'm in there on my own with a remit to speak for animals, whereas so many of these colleagues of mine are bound by the rules of major parties where they can't speak out even if they agree. And I would find that really, really difficult. But one example of a campaign where we were able to change that, which unfortunately didn't have the ending that we wanted to, but to really build a critical mass on the duck shooting issue, we actually convinced Labor politicians and even Liberal politicians to speak out and say, you know, I belong to this party and we have a policy that supports duck shooting, but I actually don't agree with it. And before the parliamentary inquiry kicked off, which was one of the things that contributed to us getting to that point, we had over half of the Labor caucus openly out there saying, I don't agree with my party's position on this. And it happens with a whole range of issues. It happens with dingoes, it happens with 1080, it happens with all, you know, the wildlife campaigns that we do, and of course companion animals. There's even a shooters and fishers and farmers MP in the Victorian Parliament, and we're in lockstep in agreement that we should ban 1080 poison. So one thing I've learned is that you can't cancel people out based on assumptions and opinions. And if we can get the outcome for animals by working together, then I think that's really great.
Yeah, that's really cool. You mentioned the duck shooting campaign. I know that's something that you've been working on for a really long time. Could you give us a bit of an update on what's happening there?
Of course. So for those who aren't aware of my very traumatic experience that, you know, when I got elected, I said my priority is banning duck shooting, and I care about that issue so deeply. I've been a duck rescue volunteer out on the wetlands here in Victoria, scooping up wounded, dying water birds since I was 19 years old, and I'm about to turn 33 now. I've been out there every single year since I first signed up, and I've seen it firsthand just how much suffering this so-called sport causes. And we, as I said, really focused on making this a big political issue, one that the government just couldn't ignore anymore. And we did that in Andy's office, and then, you know, I took the reins on that. And soon after I got elected, the Premier at the time, Daniel Andrews, said, okay, we'll have a parliamentary inquiry into this. They formed a special select committee that was established by the Labor government, and it was chaired by the Labor government, and I was a member of that committee. We had equal representation on it. The shooters were on it as well. And we worked really hard to build the case to show that duck shooting needed to be banned in Victoria, just as it has been in New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia by Labor governments. And the report that came out from this long inquiry process said the Victorian Labor government must ban duck shooting. It's not in line, with our animal welfare standards, our environmental standards, or community expectations. But as politics often goes, the Premier changed in that time. And then the Premier that we had that was willing to finally act on this issue wasn't in Parliament anymore. And after all this work and taxpayer money that went into that, the new Premier turned around and said, no, we're not doing it. But we haven't given up since then, even though it was really, really hard and was a massive step back. I was just out on the wetlands a few weeks ago for opening weekend. We continue to report shooter misbehaviour, non-compliance, cruelty to water birds, and we continue to work with politicians inside the Parliament who are just as opposed to this as ever. Labor politicians were just as disappointed as I was in that outcome. And there's a whole bunch of us who won't give up. It might not happen as quickly as we wanted it to, but I can guarantee you that it will happen in Victoria. And we're just, working on the pathways forward now.
Yeah.
So what reason, because this came as a shock to everybody. What reason did she give to say that she's reversed the decision, or, she's decided that it can keep going?
The person that became Premier in Victoria was the one person that we knew we couldn't convince on the issue. And we were just holding out hope that she would listen to what her predecessor had said, that she would listen to what her colleagues had said. We knew we couldn't change her personal view, but what we thought did matter was that her government had acknowledged this as an issue, and there was a very clear report with expert evidence in it that showed that this must be done. It ultimately was a captain's call based on her own view. She represents a country electorate, which I actually also represent in the upper house as well. And I hear from many people in her constituency that were so disappointed in that decision. So I don't know if we'll be able to convince her, but I think we'll be able to convince someone in the future. And that's why it's so important that we keep this campaign alive, that we keep the momentum going. I really want to see this done because the right thing for the birds, but I also really want to see this done for Laurie Levy, who is well into his 80s now. And I was out on the wetlands with him. He has been fighting this fight since before I was born. And, he deserves to retire.
Look, I tell you what, Laurie is just a legend, absolute legend. Yeah. And it would be so fitting for it to happen in his lifetime.
Absolutely.
But another big campaign you're working on is, of course, banning greyhound racing. Have we got any updates on what's happening there?
So I mentioned before in relation to puppy farms that we always believe if we can convince one state to do something, there'll be a real domino effect. Something that really set the greyhound campaign back was obviously when New South Wales committed to banning greyhound racing and then backflipped on it. We knew we were in for a big fight, that was probably going to be a decade or more longer when that happened. But we still have pushed on. And something that's been amazing in Victoria and across the country since I really took this on as an issue when I got elected, I could really see that this was greyhound people. They're so special. They love their dogs. They're obsessed with their specific breed. And there was this enormous community in Victoria that wasn't being tapped into and wasn't being utilised, and was so distressed about what was happening to these dogs and wanted someone to speak on their behalf. So I just started doing that and probably didn't expect the overwhelming response from people about just how grateful they were for it. And since then, we've really done a lot of work in the space to pick apart the industry while we're ultimately trying to end it. We figure that in the short term, if we can make it as hard as possible for them to exist while focusing on the big goal, that's something we should do. And I think it's probably important to note, because I know that a lot of people sort of in the vegan and the animal activism space might not be as keen on welfare improvements, but a key thing about welfare improvements is it makes existing harder for these industries that are cruel to animals. So one thing that we've done in Victoria is I secured a fully digitised whole of life tracking system, which means that the industry here has to track every single puppy from birth up until death. And that's important because we know the greyhound trainers and greyhound participants have been known for, knocking off dogs, putting them in pits when they're no longer profitable. This will be accountable for every single dog that was bred for the purpose of the industry. We continue to monitor, track injuries and deaths, and something that's really clear about Victoria is we are the deadliest state for dogs. Like, we are by far the deadliest state for dogs. We've had almost 20 dogs die in Victoria this year, and we're far ahead any of the other states, and literally hundreds of them have been injured. Something that we recently achieved in relation to that is greyhound participants are getting their dogs off the track and killing them because under racing rules, a track death is only considered a track death if that dog is literally killed then and there on the track. If they take that dog away and kill them 1 hour later, they're not included in industry data. So we could see that this was happening, and they were trying to lower their death toll by a loophole in a racing rule. We recently got changes to that where any dog that dies within a certain time period after a race is still considered a track death, and that data is going to come through later this year. So these are all the things that we're trying to do to make the industry more accountable, more transparent. We're really focused on taxpayer prop-ups right now, because I think even if people don't really care about the cruelty issues, they care if their tax dollars are keeping this industry alive in a cost of living crisis. Last year, greyhound racing Victoria could only continue to operate because they received an emergency support payment from the government in order to continue running, and that came from ordinary Victorians' paychecks, and that's just not good enough. So we're trying to pick it apart bit by bit while focusing on the main goal of just saying dog racing is not acceptable. We will shut it down. Obviously, we've had some great wins. New Zealand, Wales this year have both banned greyhound racing. Just this week, there was an article in the news that United States politicians had written to racing ministers here in Australia saying we banned greyhound racing and it was the right decision. So there's pressure coming from all angles, and I think we will see a state fall. The industry is quite big in Victoria, but I know that once we get one, the rest will follow. And there's so many wonderful greyhound advocates across the entire country, and we're all working together on this issue.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's such a big campaign, and it's just crazy to me, I guess, with the duck shooting campaign and the greyhound racing campaign. These are such archaic sports and bizarre ways for people to entertain themselves.
But you can't even call it a sport. It's like, I still see sport as something that a human is actually the person, the participant, not an animal.
Yeah.
And
I should have done sports in quotes.
I've learned to say blood sport or so-called sport. The thing you learn in this job. But you're so right. And we look at New Zealand, and a Conservative government made the decision to ban greyhound racing there. And Victoria, our government here calls our state the progressive state, and yet we can't let go of all these absolutely shocking things that other states in Australia have done or other countries have done. Australia is really far behind when it comes to our animal protection legislation, which again is why it's so important that we have people in the halls of power speaking on their behalf.
Absolutely. And I think this is very much a call for people to actually always preference AJP number one, because it gives the voice. And if you preference AJP number two, you're kind of wasting it. It's not telling people that animals matter and animals need to come first.
Yeah, it's such an important point. We're so lucky to live in a country with a preferential voting system. And I have been recently handing out for the Animal Justice Party for the federal election, where in Victoria, we actually just received our highest vote at a federal election in our state. But a lot of people came out and they said, I voted for you. I put you 2 or I put you 3. And so many people don't understand that the beauty of our system is, even if we can't win the seat and they're worried about giving the vote to us, just by giving us that one makes such a difference. It gives our party a platform. It gives us funding if we get over 4%. But most importantly, the major parties look at the votes of the minor parties. And if they can see people are voting for the Animal Justice Party, they're going to say, we need to do something about animals. And then your vote keeps flowing down to your 2 till your 3 till it's exhausted. So I'm really determined to head to the state election to do some civics education on how our voting system works, because a lot of people want to support us, but they're afraid about where their vote is going. And we need to overcome that, because it cannot be wasted.
Exactly. We need to teach this in schools. Like, why are they not teaching how to vote in schools?
Just don't even start me on the schools. Like, there's so much that we need to get into the schools.
It's the hill I will die on, is the fact we're not taught any sort of civics or politics in school. I mean, I know this stuff because I'm interested in it. And my friends, like I'm in my 30s, my friends who care about issues and are engaged on social issues, they'll message me on election day and being like, oh, I'm confused. Can you help me? And it's like, these are the people who care. So, you know, a lot of people just don't have that interest. And it's, you know, people often say to me, oh, I don't really care about politics. And I always say, well, politics cares about you. And, you know, everyone should be learning about it.
Yeah. So we've touched on a couple of the campaigns that are still in the process of being hard won.
Yeah.
But what updates can you give us about recent wins that you've had for animals, or I guess just recent wins in general in Parliament?
Yeah. Well, yesterday was Budget Day, which is always a very exciting day for me. It sounds very nerdy, but something we quickly learnt when the Animal Justice Party got into Parliament is we could submit funding requests on behalf of the organisations and advocacy groups that we work with and give them that critical funding and allow them to continue operating. And again, it's just another example of something that was not happening until the AJP was in Parliament. So every year I submit funding requests on behalf of a range of organisations, and it's not my decision. Ultimately, it's the government's decision, but we push really hard and make a case for why certain groups or individuals need this funding. Just yesterday, it was really exciting. I got to call Vets for Compassion, who are doing incredible work in Victoria. They went to the truck rollover in the city. They've been out in the Grampians at the bushfires. I got to call them yesterday and say I'd secured funding for them off the government to continue operating for another year. And a range of shelters who got, you know, an amount of money that's not much to the government, but life-changing for them. The day before that, I opened a not-for-profit vet clinic in Castlemaine, which is very exciting to me because it's sort of on our pathway to vet care in Victoria and Australia, where we want sort of a public vet care system for animals like we have for people. And some people might think that's weird, but keeping people and their animals together, it's not just about the welfare of that animal, it's about the welfare of people too. We know that when we separate families, it results in cost to taxpayers to the tune of loneliness, poor mental health, poor physical health. And we should be doing everything we can to ensure that the companionship of a pet is not just for the privileged, and acknowledge that people's circumstances change. So I got to open this vet clinic in Castlemaine, which again was another budget bid that I got a few years earlier. And this allowed them to build Victoria's first physical building of a not-for-profit vet clinic. So days like that are always really great. But when it comes to legislation, I recently secured a commitment for animals to be included in family violence legislation. And you both would have dealt with this at a booth before, when people say, you know, well, why would I vote for animals when people are suffering too? And I like to use this as an example of the ways that everything is intertwined, everything is interlinked. I got contacted by a number of women who, you know, demonstrated this overwhelming evidence that continuously comes up, that animals are being used as a tool for coercive control, for manipulation. We know that leaving an animal is one of the main reasons why women often won't leave a violent home. And the cure to that, the way to solve it, was by getting our animals acknowledged in those laws. So that's something I got the commitment off the government, and the legislation's going through Parliament in the coming months, which is really, really exciting. And, you know, it won't just protect animals, it'll protect people too.
So that brings me to, what strategies have you found most effective in gaining support? Because you've got so much support now, gaining support with other parliamentarians on the whole animal issues.
Yeah, look, I think so often my role is actually to take it back to basics and explain these things to people. So often we have assumed knowledge when we're talking to our colleagues or our peers. And a lot of things I talk about in Parliament that I just know about because I've been operating in this space for a really long time, they just have no idea about. There's members of the government, when I talk about, you know, commercial kangaroo slaughter, which is approved by the government, they don't even know what's happening. So a big part of my work is education, but I think it's also finding common ground as well. Something that it's not for everyone, but something that you learn in politics is you have to be pragmatic, and you have to, we always say, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And it's finding common ground and achieving wins where you can and building those relationships. And I think for me, I really had to overcome an idea about me when I got elected, because I was like the young, tattooed, out there person. And I think they thought I was going to be really difficult to work with. And I, across my, 2.5 years in Parliament, have worked to form, friendships, or at the very least working relationships with people. And when you get to that point, people have that sympathy and that empathy and that compassion that they might not have had previously. And the reality is, a lot of my colleagues also just want to see us succeed. They like having the Animal Justice Party in the Parliament. They think that, we have solid heads on our shoulders, and we're serious players now, which is really cool to see. But yeah, it's being pragmatic. It's not turning something down because it's not perfect, which we have to do a lot in the animal space, and accepting any progress as good progress.
It's
a bit speechless.
Yeah, I'm sort of sitting here going, I don't know how you do it. Like, seriously, don't know how you do it.
Yeah.
We're both dabbled in, when we were in Queensland, we're both, had lots to do, as you know, with Animal Justice Party, but not in Parliament as such. We did get called into Parliament. That'll go in the bloopers reel. We did get called into parliamentary hearings, but to deal with this on a day-to-day basis and dealing with all different sides. So you've got the negative, you've got the positive, you've got the angry, you've got the supportive. It must do your brain in sometimes.
It does. I think something that's very beautiful about the upper house in Victoria, and I know that Queensland doesn't even have an upper house, which is just tragic, because, that's our best chance to get elected. We spend an absurd amount of time together in the upper house. We're the house of review. It's a house where the government does not have a majority. There's equal amount crossbench as opposition MPs. So our days are long because Labor doesn't get to control the House, which is a good thing for democracy. But it means we spend far more time together than the lower house MPs. I finished work at 3 a.m. Friday morning when the sitting day started at 9:30 a.m. on the Thursday. So it's in those moments where you sit there together and you find common ground, and you humanize each other. And I think people so often look at politicians and they have this idea about them, and it's fair to criticize us. We are there to represent the public. We work for people. But I fundamentally believe no one goes into politics for any other reason than they want to do good things. We just disagree on what those good things are, and it's my job to change their perceptions.
Yeah. That's a nice way to think about it, because it can be really hard to carry around the weight of feeling like what you have to say and what you want for animals is really important, and other people don't necessarily agree.
Absolutely. And there's been times in my job where I have gotten angry and I have lost my cool and I have been offended by things. I chair a parliamentary committee, which is a lot of work, but so worth it. There's 3 standing committees in the upper house, and I have the economy and infrastructure committee, which gets every single referral that relates to agriculture or racing. And as a chair, it means that I sort of have say over the direction of our inquiries and things like that. So I had a parliamentary inquiry into pig welfare that came to my committee, and I've got one coming up now that's into road strike. But there was a moment in the parliamentary inquiry into pig welfare where we had people come in from the Farm Transparency Project and played us some really confronting footage that, I'm sure many of us would have seen of gassing sows and of factory farms, and even of a pig being sexually abused. And my colleagues walked out of the room and wouldn't watch it because it was illegally obtained. And it's those moments where it's just, it is hard to, it is hard to keep those relationships, and it is hard to sort of find that common ground. But I know that I used to be quite an angry activist when I first started out, and, I reflect on how I was feeling then because I was so confronted by all the things that I'd learned. I think there's a space for every kind of advocacy, but I believe that I'm doing my best work when, I can relate to people and I can work with them. So, even in the moments where I have felt like this is so not worth it and I want to throw it in, if we do that, it's the animals that lose out. So got to keep pushing on.
So you sort of mentioned a bit about the pig inquiry, which brings to this question: how do you balance pushing for ambitious reforms while working within the constraints of the political system?
Yeah. So I touched on this before. It's my view that I will always state my position on an issue and what I would like to see ultimately sort of as the end game. But any progress is good progress. So something we're up against in the pig welfare inquiry is that, like, I'm vegan. I've been vegan for a really long time. I don't think it's acceptable to eat pigs or confine pigs or farm pigs in any way. But what I would like to see, as long as the industry does exist, is improvements to welfare. I don't want to see animals being mutilated without pain relief. I don't want their tails being cut off or their teeth being pulled out. And these are all things that are small that aren't going to change the end outcome for them, but it is going to significantly reduce pain and suffering. And they are the things we can change while still having the broader philosophical conversation about whether or not it's right to use animals in this way. And I know not everyone will agree with me on that, but I can't pass a law that says we can't eat animals, but I can pass a law that says don't mutilate pigs without pain relief. So if I can do that, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I can understand that. It would be really hard to have the two kind of mindsets running parallel of, these are the welfarist reforms, but then this is the end destination where we want to get to.
Exactly. And as I said before, welfare improvements have an economic impact, and that all plays a part in people in these industries deciding whether they want to stay in them and that progression towards ending them.
And I think, the bottom line, because we're all activists and been doing amazing stuff on the ground and everywhere, there are levels of activism that I always say that you could be serving somebody a plant-based meal. And then as all the stages up to abolition. But then what I think people have to realise is for actual change to happen, we need those voices in the political system, because we can be yelling and screaming as much as we want, but if there isn't governments or politicians willing to make those changes, it's never going to happen.
Absolutely. And that's something that I really learned in this job is, I would organise protests out the front of politicians' offices. And now I'm a politician with an office. And I can tell you there's days where if there was a protest out the front of my office, I wouldn't know about it because, I'm at Parliament or I'm out in the community at an event or, I've got another engagement and my staff might be with me. And that's why it's so important to have those people that are actually in the building to share that message as well. And, I am often sort of out there speaking about animals, different issues, different campaigns, and people are, often quite, interested in just how much ground we can cover and how many topics, that I'm able to talk about in a day in Parliament. That's not me. That's the many organisations and advocacy groups that I work with. Like you said before on the pyramid, I'm here in Parliament doing the policy work, doing the legislative work, but there's all these people that are working underneath that are sending this message up, who are doing the hard yards, collecting data, gathering evidence of cruelty, tracking dogs or, investigating farms. And I'm just a lucky person that gets to share their message. So every form of advocacy is vital and plays a part. And, I think it's what's most important is people find the thing that they're good at and they give that skill to animals.
And I think that one of the messages that I gave at the Animal Rights Forum last year was we need to start working together again as groups. There's been, too much division over the years. We need to start coming back together where we support everybody's actions and we don't complain about another person's actions, because what's right for them is not right for you. But go and do your own forms, but come together for all the big things, all the marches, all the protests. Be there and be seen.
Yeah, I think something that I noticed distinctly, particularly post-COVID, is that a lot of people sort of changed the directions, like staying vegan and, still caring about issues. But back in the days when, I was a baby vegan and there was less vegans, we would have far more people at actions than we do now. And, as a party as well, we've really felt those impacts when it comes to volunteers on election day and, people not even realizing the value that it contributes by volunteering a few hours on election day to hand out how to vote cards. I'm really hopeful that sort of the volunteerism in our movement can build back up. I know that many other sort of spaces in advocacy are feeling the same thing. And yeah, I completely agree. I try and work with, I work with many different groups across the state, and they all have different tactics and views on how to get things done, but they're all in agreement that we want to help animals.
Yeah.
I think for me, the main thing is, why are we ruling people out just because we don't agree on this one tiny little thing? Collectively, we all want what's best for the animals. We all want a vegan world, but we might not agree on this one little tiny aspect. So then we disregard that person or that organization, which is just silly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think my view as well is that, I mean, I've experienced the same criticism as a politician for, even being associated with other politicians who might have views on some of our issues or other issues that, don't, I guess, necessarily align. And I do understand that concern when it gets to a certain point. And I certainly wouldn't, want to associate with anyone that's like harmful or, dangerous to people. But what I would also say is that we don't change people's views or bring them to our side by not speaking to them. And I think it's really important that we have difficult conversations, because if we're not having difficult conversations, we're actually solidifying people even more strongly into their views by sort of not offering an alternative. And that's something that I constantly have to do in my role. And, I think particularly, I guess, more broadly as a movement, the left or, progressives, it feels quite fractured. And I do believe it's because we're not great at talking to each other, and it's something that I'm sort of hopeful will change in the future.
Well, you sort of touched a little bit on sort of criticism, but you do receive, unfortunately, a lot of judgment and criticism online. So how do you, I know, and I'm really sorry that you get that, because you just don't deserve it.
Some of the stuff, Georgie, I don't know how you don't let it affect
I want to
you.
leap down my phone and just, I won't go there because that's a bit violent. But how do you continue on and not let it affect you, or does it affect you and you don't show it?
Look, it affects me if it gets me on the wrong day. And I'll give you an example of that. I just said we sat until 3 a.m. on Friday morning, and one of the first things I did was, pick up my phone when I woke up after that late night sitting, and I had like a very, very abusive, threatening email. And, that sort of shook me more than it usually would. But I have developed a unhealthily thick skin, which I hate saying, because that shouldn't be a prerequisite for politics. You shouldn't have to be ready and equipped to deal with quite violent abuse. I think for me, it's particularly sort of, I guess, on steroids, because I'm young and I'm a woman, which is often can be bad in politics, but I'm also taking on male-dominated. I'm not just, a woman in a major party. I'm taking on male-dominated industries. I mean, I'm talking about farmers, I'm talking about shooters, and the activities and pursuits that are largely participated in by men, which can result in, I think, a lot of the stuff that I get. Not saying it's just them, but it's become par for the course now, and it shouldn't be, because the thing that I don't want to happen, that is my biggest concern, is I don't want young women looking at me and my political career and thinking I'd really love to contribute to public life, but I don't want to deal with what Georgie has to deal with. So that's sort of why I've taken to calling it out and making it clear that it's not acceptable. But I have wonderful staff who monitor a lot of it for me. And I've actually recently installed a AI tool on my social media that automatically filters out abuse and allows me to sort of read it when I'm ready to. But I have a great support system around me. Politics really teaches you who your friends are and the people who support you. And, as long as I'm reminded that I have those people, you learn to deal with it, but it absolutely should not be part of the job. And particularly so when, it's coming in a way that is, I guess, I live in a country town, I have animals, like I often sort of worry about the broader implications that could come with this job. And that's why I'm determined to change it, because, it shouldn't be a setting for anyone that comes into this.
I love it when both you and Emma call them out in your Instagram reels, and you'll have it in signs or you'll have it appearing on the screen, and you just do it so incredibly well. And I just sit there laughing and watch it again and just go, man, this is the best way to do this.
I know.
One of my favorite ones was my graphic designer. She's amazing. She turned abusive comments into inspirational quotes, and she put she put 1,000 Miles by Vanessa Carlton in the background. So good.
You got to have a bit of humor with it, because otherwise it is just too much to deal with. But yeah,
Don't laugh, you'll cry.
exactly. Yeah. Again, I want to echo what Rick said. We're so sorry that all of that abuse comes your way. You really don't deserve it. But thank you for calling it out, because it does set the precedent for everyone else that it's not okay. And as women, we're not going to just sit back and cop that.
And I think this also comes down to a lack of education in schools. And we're not educating our younger generations properly in how to deal with other people, especially male-female violence, whether it be physical or verbal abuse. There is not enough being done about that. Now, I know people are saying, oh, the governments have got to change it. But I don't know that the governments actually can do stuff. It needs to come from the parents, needs to come from the schools. They need to start implementing changes and teaching these young people how to deal with life, teach them life skills. And again, taking it back to teach them political skills. And I'm doing a lot of the vegan education stuff for Vegan Australia, teaching them the differences about ethics and the ethics of animal cruelty. These all need to be in high schools and primary schools and need to be taught now, not in 10, 15, 20 years' time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's some really concerning data coming out of Australian schools about content being consumed by young people and the way that it's shaping their minds and the way that they think it's sort of acceptable to engage in real life and online. And of course, that has long-running impact. And we know that violence often starts with words before it becomes physical. And, by showing people from a young age that these things aren't acceptable, it changes that course for the future.
Absolutely. So we just spoke about a couple of tough subjects. What do you do to recharge and stay motivated, I guess, amidst all of those challenges?
Yeah, so I live on 8 acres, and I'm really lucky that I share my home with a number of animals. So actually behind me right now, I've got 2 snoring sausage dogs and an ancient cavalier. I got her from she was a puppy farm rescue. I spoke before about when Victoria banned puppy farms. She was actually a result of that legislation when her puppy farmer had to shut down his breeding facility. So it's like living with a lovely reminder of, legislative change for animals. But I've got my 3 dogs, I've got 4 rescue cats, and then I've got 15 sheep as well, and 3 horses. So I guess my downtime is spending time with animals. They do so much for us to sort of take us away. It's like therapy. And the thing that I really love about spending time with animals is it helps me check out from work, but it also gives me that reminder of why I do what I do. Sometimes I can watch like the most gruesome or confronting footage of animal cruelty and you become a little bit hardened to it. Like, it's wrong, it's upsetting, but it doesn't impact you emotionally like it used to. One of the things I think that sort of pulls on my heartstrings the most is when I go out to the paddock and my sheep come running up to me and they want to cuddle and they want to wheat bix, or I sit down on the ground and, they'll come and huddle around my lap. They're the things that emotionally affect me, but it's so important to, I guess, spend time with, the things that sort of lower your heart rate, lower your cortisol levels. So that's how I like to spend my time. I walk my dog. I try and walk my dogs, every single day out in the bush. Awake, put my phone on do not disturb, to have that moment to be away from it all. And I'm also an auntie, so I have a nephew and 2 nieces, and I try and get to my family as much as possible who have deep concern about me doing this job. My mum is the most anxious person on the planet, so I basically can't talk to her about my work because all she does is worry about me. But spending time with my family is really important to me as well.
Oh, bless your mum. We won't send her this episode.
Yeah. My mum told me if I ever got back into standing for politics again, she'll kill me. So
it's like, I tell her not to go on my social media, but every now and then she'll, call me and she'll be like, one of my friends told me that she saw this on Facebook or she saw this on the news, and she worries.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
So-
I'd probably be the same, to be honest, if I was a mum.
So, Georgie, you are an amazing inspiration to all of us. You know, you've done in your short time in politics, you have done so much, but you've done so much that we've heard of course, beforehand. We can't thank you enough for everything you're doing for the animals.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Now,
Oh.
for listeners, what is the best way? Well, actually, first, do you want people to contact you? But what's the best way for them to contact you or get involved in political change for animals?
Yeah, look, so the first thing I would say is to join the Animal Justice Party. I would not be where I am if I wasn't in the Animal Justice Party. And that's really important for me to say, because here in Victoria, a lot of people know me as Georgie Purcell, the politician, and might not realise I'm actually from the Animal Justice Party. And it's so important for me to stress that, you know, I'm here because of the support and the advocacy of the AJP, and more importantly, the volunteers who put in the hard yards to get me into Parliament. So joining the AJP is, you know, a really important thing that people can do to elevate our work and ensure that it keeps on going. But also I'm most active on Instagram, and that's where anyone can go to see the work that I'm doing, but more importantly, get involved in it. I'm constantly running online petitions and online actions, or things that people can do to support the campaigns that I'm running here in Victoria. So my Instagram is georgie.purcell.ajp. And then if someone wants to talk to me about an animal welfare issue, it's best to do it via email to ensure that I don't lose it, because I get a lot of DMs on Instagram, and a lot of them are those angry people that we were just talking about. So I don't always go through them all. And my email is georgie.purcell@parliament.vic.gov.au.
Thank you.
That's just awesome. And it just, if I can just go back to something we talked about beforehand, you're coming up for re-election in 2026. Now, I'm asking every single person who listens to this podcast to either, if you're in Victoria, get behind Georgie. If you are in other states, please share content, because content shares will get people's notice. Do everything you can possibly do to get Georgie back in, and, of course, any other AJP politicians we have coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't stress enough just how important it is that when it comes to election season for us, we have volunteers on the ground, a couple of hours handing out how to vote cards. We know that at some booths that can double our vote, and that's what we'll be really focused on over the next year. And it's not just about me. Of course, we could win more seats here in Victoria, but a few months after I'm up for re-election, Emma's up for re-election as well. So we want to make sure that the party is geared up and well-resourced and ready to go for the battles that we have over the next 18 months.
Yeah. Well, lots of work for all of us to do on the ground. Thank you so much for your time, Georgie. We know you're incredibly busy, but we really appreciate you talking to us and getting the message out there about AJP. And we're so thankful for all of the work that you're doing.
Oh my gosh. I'm thankful for the work that you two are doing as well. Of course, I know you outside of this podcast, and you're both doing amazing things. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Coming from you, it means a lot to us. So really appreciate it. So, folks, that brings us to the end of yet another inspiring episode. Oh, God, I love doing this podcast.
We say it every time.
I know. We walk away and go, wow, that was really amazing. And again, this has been really amazing. So, folks, thank you to Georgie. Thank you to everybody who's been listening and supporting us in the podcast, because we'll keep going. We love doing it. So until our next episode, we'll see you again soon.
Catch you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change.
Be sure to follow us on social media at @thevegancompass_podcast. See you next time.